Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid, the most popular homesteading channel on the internet that has absolutely nothing to do with homesteading. So as you might be able to tell, it's evening. There's probably only 20 minutes of daylight left. It's the first week of August and fall is in the air. Have you felt it? Some of the leaves are starting to change a little bit, just a slight hue. Some of the poplar leaves are coming down. The temperatures are starting to go down, which is wonderful. Seeing the deer out and about. So I've got a story for you because since fall is in the air, I'm also thinking a lot about Halloween. A lot of you know me as the man who actually invented Halloween. I do have plans for this October to come up here and tell a story every night for the entire month of October. It's going to be a hodgepodge because there is no third volume of October Nights yet. But lots of news stories you guys haven't heard yet have been coming in from contributors. I've been writing some really good short stories, Halloween-themed short stories. I'll have enough to share with you in October. But before we get there, there's a story that the gentleman that told me the story passed away just a couple of weeks ago. And he told me the story probably 5 or 6 years ago. So there's a question I like to ask my elders on their birthdays. For example, my friend Mike, if he's watching, or his wife Lonnie, shout out. I know she watches a lot. He had his 70th birthday a couple weeks ago, and we went with him and celebrated it in his hometown of Harbor Bay on Long Island, part of the Hamptons. Hampton Bay, that was it. Hampton Bay on Long Island. Spent a week up there. I had a great time. Mike turned 70, and I asked him this question. The question is this, because I'm turning 50 in a few months. So I posed the question, what is it that you know now at your age that you didn't know at my age that you wish you had? And I love asking people who are a little bit older than me or a lot older than me this question because I feel that I can draw from the wisdom of my elders. Mike's question, or Mike's answer, was wonderful. He said that he wishes that he hadn't have stressed out so much about his work. Now, he doesn't regret having done the work he did or working as much as he did, but the stress. He would do all that he could do, but then he would worry about it. He would worry about it. It wasn't necessarily the stress, it was the worry. He says, looking back, he wished he hadn't worried because it was pointless. Once you've done all that you can do, you've done all that you can do. And worrying isn't going to make the situation any better. It's only going to make you feel worse. And so he wishes he hadn't done that. And I thought that was great advice. Well, 5 or 6 years ago, I had another friend whose name will remain anonymous. I asked that same question when he turned 80. I was like 44, 45 at the time. And I said, what do you know now at your age that you wish you'd known at my age? And his answer was different than the answers I typically get, like the one I just shared with you from my friend Mike. This guy says, it's not that there's anything I wish I knew. It's something that has been eating me alive for, I guess would it be more than half a century, roughly 60 years. And I asked him if he cared to enlighten me, and he says, it's just me and you here because we happen to be alone that day. At that time, it wasn't a birthday party. He was going to have one later, and I couldn't make it, so I stopped by to see him since I couldn't be there that evening. He said, and the guy was a retired law enforcement officer. And again, he's passed away now. He had started out as a county sheriff's deputy, worked his way up to a state trooper, retired as a state trooper. He was known for being fair but just. He was known for going by the book. He was known for treating people with dignity and respect. If he came out to arrest you, no matter how heinous the charges were against you, he called you sir, he called you ma'am, he didn't manhandle you, he treated you with respect and dignity. But he told me of a case when he was 23 years old. He had been a sheriff's deputy for less than a year, and he he let a murderer go free. And he says it's the only time in his career that he ever did such a thing for such a person. And he knew that what he did was right at the time, but he's also regretted it because of the fact that as a man of the law, he understands the law must be enforced no matter how heart-wrenching the story behind the crime might be. The law is law. And he says that's the only time in his career when he's ever done such a thing. And I said, wow, well, I can respect you coming forward to me about that. I says, do you mind telling me what it was about? And he says, I don't mind telling you. He says, you're not the first person I've told. I've told some close friends. I've told some family members. Everybody involved with the situation, like surviving family members or whatever, have long been passed away. So he wasn't really concerned with any sort of recourse for what he had done. But basically the story was this. This was out in very, very, very rural Virginia, like probably an hour and a half away from the closest thing that could even remotely be considered a town. So the story, the unofficial official story that was given was this. A drifter who actually turned out to be an escaped convict was making his way through this area. He'd escaped down south from a southern state, not Virginia, somewhere further south, and he was trying to get home back up north somewhere, and he was cutting through central Virginia, very rural, very remote area. So just before dark, he stops off at this house because it happened to be the only house in this location. And there was a couple there, a married couple. They were in their late 30s, early 40s. Just a man and a woman. They didn't have any children. Turns out, for whatever reasons, they couldn't. And mind you, this would have been back in the 1940s. Back then, they didn't have the science technology like we do today. Just couldn't have kids. So the woman, however, was very beautiful. They were farmers. Nothing large, just enough like self-sustaining, and they sold produce and whatnot locally so they could have some money to go with their self-sustainment that they grew and they raised. So this drifter stops by and he asks if he can have dinner and if he can spend the night. Well, the couple, as the woman told this at the time 23-year-old sheriff's deputy when he was out there interviewing her after the murderers, it's more than one, I'll point out, they felt uneasy in this man's presence, but they were so uneasy because they were so intimidated by this guy. They were afraid that if they told him no, he would kill them. He would just kill them. And so the best chance they had was to say, sure, you can spend the night. And actually, we're getting ready to sit down for dinner and you're welcome to join us. So they sat down for dinner, and the criminal, the convict, and they didn't know the guy was a convict. The woman that this then sheriff's deputy interviewed didn't know any of this until this particular interview. But he was creepy as all get out. He constantly stared at this woman, wouldn't take his eyes off of her, was undressing her with his eyes from head to toe. Her husband was terrified of the guy. He was a big guy. He was like 6'3", 6'4", 240, not an ounce of fat on him. I mean, he could have been like a NFL tight end or a linebacker, just a huge guy. And he was a convicted murderer, by the way. So he just keeps eyeballing this woman, just his mouth's watering, not because of the food, but because of her, all through dinner. And he's not saying anything. And they try to speak to him, and he just chuckles, this real nervous, creepy, like, while he's eyeballing her and eating the corn on the cob and whatnot. Well, that night, the woman's husband, as he had a tendency to do, was reading the paper in the chair, drinking a few beers, and his wife was in the living room with him in her chair, and this criminal was on the Davenport, as they would have called him back then, hybrid between a couch and a love seat. And they're trying to engage him in conversation, and he's not conversing with them. He's just continuing to glare at this woman. Again, a beautiful woman in her late 30s, creepy laughing anytime they are trying to talk to him. Well, she decides she's going to go to bed, and she tells her husband, let's go to bed. Well, the husband was afraid to leave this guy alone in the living room. So he told her to go on to bed and he'd join her shortly. Well, she went on into the bedroom and she fell asleep eventually. Well, next thing she knows, she wakes up. Somebody's on top of her, and it wasn't her husband. It's this convict. He's on top of her, giggling, creepy laugh. Well, she manages to get her way out from underneath him, and she runs into the living room. Well, her husband's there, passed out in the recliner, sleeping with the paper over his face, and she's yelling for him. Let's say his name's James. James, help. Well, he's so deep asleep, he doesn't wake up. Well, the criminal comes after this woman. She runs out of the house. She runs outside, and it's really windy. The wind's blowing. There's no rain, and it was October, ironically. The wind's blowing and howling, and she takes off running through the forest, and the guy catches up to her. He tackles her, and he starts ripping her clothes off of her. But she manages to get away again. She runs back to the house, thinking for sure her husband's heard this ruckus, and she's yelling as she runs in, James! He won't get up out of his recliner. He's just sleeping. Well, she grabs the gun and runs out the back door because the guy's coming in the front door. And they didn't keep a loaded gun in the house. They were responsible gun owners. Didn't have children, like I said, never kept a loaded weapon in the house. So she had grabbed a couple shells. It was a shotgun. She runs out the back door, screaming the whole time, James! And this lunatic's just throwing furniture around as he's coming into the house. And, of course, the husband's just laying there, appearing to be deep asleep. She gets out back. She manages to load around into the shotgun, but the guy jumps on top of her, knocks the gun out of her hands, rips the rest of whatever clothes she had left off of her. She gets away again. Third time's a charm, because this time when she gets away, she gets to that shotgun and she puts it to his head, pulls the trigger, and that's all she wrote. And then she passed out. Well, she woke up the next morning just after sunrise, and she manages to go into the house, and there's her husband still in the chair, and she cleans herself up, and she goes in and sits down at the table. She's got coffee brewing. Well, her husband finally stirs. He comes in, and he sits down at the table after getting her a cup of coffee and himself a cup of coffee, and she's in shock. She's just in absolute shock. He's sipping his coffee, and he says to her, boy, it sure was windy last night, wasn't it? And she says, how would you know that? He says, oh, I heard that wind howling all night. It was just howling up a ruckus out there. Heard the limbs on the trees scraping up against the window. She got up. She walked into the other room, and she got that shotgun and that other shell she had, and she put it in that barrel, and she stuck it to her husband's head, and it's all that she wrote for him as well. Well, my friend who told me this story says that when he heard the story straight from the woman's lips, and he knew her to be an upstanding Christian member of her community, never harmed a fly or a soul in her life, he just couldn't see locking her up for life, if not worse, for that. Here her cowardly husband sat in that chair and was too afraid to get up and protect his wife while she went through all that. And of course she knew he'd heard everything because he'd heard the wind howling. So he told me, he says, I know I did the right thing, but it just has never sat well with me that I never upheld the law to its absolute letter. I told him, I said, you know what? I've always respected you, but after hearing that story, I got more respect for you than I did before. I think you can go to your grave with a clean conscience. And here just a couple weeks ago he did. So I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope you come back and join me this October, and maybe we'll hit a few more between now and then as we get into fall. Some of these creepy stories, I love telling them, and I know there's some of you out there like hearing them. So thanks for being here with me, and again, thank you for all the support, all of you who have gone over to watch me now on Facebook, on my Facebook page, Sick Twisted Humor. We are hitting grand slam after grand slam over there, and I thank all of you for supporting me over there as well. So see you for more next time here on the most popular homesteading channel on the entire internet that has absolutely nothing to do with homesteading. Homesteading off the grid. See you next time.